Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Clutter Boss, the internet's best, possibly only weekly decluttering advice show. I am Jes Marcy. I am your clutter boss for today. Okay, as usual, we have some great questions. But as usual, the questions always tend to follow some similar pattern of topic, which is so interesting to me. Today we have two topics. The first is a topic, and I really hesitate to even use this word, but I'm going to because it specifically was used in both of these questions. The questions are about hoarders. Now, I just want to say I don't agree with using the term hoarder and applying it to somebody who does not have a medical diagnosis. If you have not been diagnosed as a hoarder, it is not okay for us to refer to other people as hoarders. There is no positive connotation to that term. If you think you might be a hoarder, if you classify somebody else as a hoarder, you are perpetuating a label that is really a medical diagnosis and is shrouded in shame and overwhelm and embarrassment. I think there's other terms that we can use that are better, especially again in the absence of a medical diagnosis. A clutterer, I've heard people say I'm a clutterer, a clutterer. I have a lot of clutter. I struggle with letting go. You can describe what's going on without saying hoarder, because again, when we use the term hoarder, it's a medical diagnosis, period. So every time I say the word or read it, I really feel like we need to talk about why we're using this term and when it's appropriate and not appropriate to use it. So that is my little caveat about these first two questions. So the two questions that came in about dealing with somebody who has hoarding tendencies. I've been trying to help a hoarder, but it's more work for just me, and she doesn't trust people coming in to help. What can I do going forward? I'm open to all suggestions. If somebody has truly been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, it is going to be very difficult. And I am going to make an assumption here. I am assuming that you are helping this person and that your intention is to help them remove stuff from their home. That is typically when people say, I am going to help a hoarder, what they're saying is, I'm going to help remove stuff from the home. If somebody is truly been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, it is very, very unlikely that you are going to be able to help them remove stuff from their home. If you have hoarding disorder, typically you have also been diagnosed with another mental health situation. Perhaps it is OCD. In fact, you used to only be able to get a hoarding diagnosis if you were first diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. That is not the case anymore. Hoarding disorder is its own diagnosis. That being said, usually when somebody has been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, it is a very complex diagnosis, and it is usually a co-diagnosis with something else. So as the average, really well-meaning, good-hearted friend, to have this intention to go in and help somebody who has been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, to help them remove stuff from their house, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to help a friend who's been diagnosed with cancer. I'm going to go and treat them, right? We are not qualified to help people with hoarding disorder remove items from their homes. That is outside of the scope of what we as friends can do for somebody with that diagnosis. That being said, there is always something that you can do to help a friend. And typically it looks different than what your expectation is, but there's always something that you can do. So if you have a friend that you're trying to help who's a hoarder and they don't trust people coming in to help, What you can do is see if there's another way that you can be a support for this person in their life. Can you be somebody that is a listening ear? Can you be there to hear their story? Can you be present for them? Can you help them with groceries? Can you help them maybe with yard work? Can you help this person in some way that is not going into their house and removing stuff? Because for somebody who has hoarding disorder, one reason they're probably not trusting is because people are trying to take away their stuff. And that can be very re-traumatizing. I mean, hoarding disorder, typically there's some trauma history usually. So if you're going in and trying to basically remove a security blanket, it can be very re-traumatizing. So how can you help somebody that is not actually taking stuff out of their house? Because if you're not qualified to do that, then and even if you are a medical professional who has studied hoarding disorder, really understands it, it's truly difficult to work with somebody who has a diagnosis of hoarding disorder. And a lot of times it's because our expectation is that we can move forward at a certain pace. From my experience working with a lot of people who have a lot of clutter, the pace is slow, and that is okay. Once you remove something, one single thing, there is a lot of emotion that comes with it. There is a lot of kind of follow-up that needs to be done that you as an individual need to do to internally process what is happening. Clutter is never about the stuff, ever. If clutter were about the stuff, we would have no problem decluttering. It's never about the stuff. It is always about the emotions, the finances, the relationships, the story, the history. It is always about something else. So when you're dealing with somebody who has an extreme attachment or collection and you take something away, you have to process all of the other stuff that comes along with it. So the process is a slow moving process. Now, steady action, steady movement is incredible, but it's slow moving. So if you're going in to help somebody who has a tremendous amount of clutter, you may expect that at your pace, letting go of somebody else's stuff, you can move pretty rapidly. But the reality is, if you got through one or two or three things in an hour, that might be a very impressive pace for that person. So, all of that being said, the best way that you can help somebody who has hoarding disorder is probably not to go in there and expect that you can remove things from their home. It is probably to go in there and say, "Hey, I see you. I understand that there's a lot more to this picture than meets the eye. I have never walked a mile in your shoes. I want to be here for you as a friend. I recognize that that might mean not helping you with the clutter, but helping you with other things in your life so that if you're ready to tackle the clutter, you have time to do that on your own with your at your own pace." It's really complicated. And unfortunately, so much of what we see on the media and so much of what we see from the professional organizing industry doesn't recognize this at all. Or if we talk about like that horrible show Hoarders, the way that they are tackling the clutter, and I understand there's a lot of extenuating circumstances if you're on that show, is not how I would recommend doing it because it's re-traumatizing. That was a very long answer to this question, but this is a topic that we need to talk about because throwing around this term, as we tend to do, is not helpful to anyone who's really struggling with a lot of clutter. The second question along these lines: how do you deal with a hoarder's clutter that belongs to the man that you live with? Okay. So if your significant, I'm assuming it's a significant other here. So if you're saying a hoarder's clutter, it has this person been diagnosed with hoarding disorder? Because number one, if they have a lot of clutter and you think they are a hoarder, have you gone down that path of getting an actual diagnosis? If not, that's the place to start, is to see if we can get a medical diagnosis and more understanding around what is going on. Again, if somebody has been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, they probably have a co-diagnosis also. And working on that co-diagnosis and with you in a support role can be really powerful. But just tackling somebody else's clutter with the assumption that they're a hoarder but without a medical diagnosis is it's a futile effort, I think. My second question is, if you're living with somebody who has what we may say hoarding level clutter, like a tremendous amount of clutter, my number one question to you is it safe? Are you in a safe living environment? And I do believe that you can live in a generally safe environment and also have a lot of stuff. However, the more stuff that you have, the more unsafe the environment can become. So, if you're in a relationship with somebody and they have been diagnosed with hoarding disorder, my question to you is, how safe is this environment? Because at the end of the day, you have to prioritize making yourself safe first. That is your number one prerogative. Is, are you safe? Are you safe in a relationship? Oftentimes we get asked this question and it's about domestic abuse. Most of the time, medical professionals don't think about the safety that comes with stuff. So I want you to think about this in a similar way. Are you safe in your living environment? Period. Whether we're talking about domestic abuse, whether we're talking about living with a tremendous amount of stuff in your house, is it a safe living environment? If it is not a safe living environment, you need to figure out your next step. What is your course of action to keep yourself safe? That is your number one priority. Sometimes removing yourself from the situation and then still being a support to the other person might be the way to go. If you are living with somebody who has a lot of clutter, or if this is you, you have a lot of clutter, you've not been medically diagnosed with hoarding disorder, you are, and I think there's a comment here, I look like a hoarder, but I think I'm more of out of control clutter, disorganization, and little motivation. I think that that would describe a lot of the people that we work with in our communities, except that I would say out of control clutter and disorganization. I wouldn't say it's little motivation. I would actually say it's more along the lines of overwhelm. When we are tremendously overwhelmed, our nervous system tends to go into fight or flight or shut down, right? So motivation usually has very little to do with it. There's usually a lot of other important things that are going on that kind of masquerade as little motivation. If you're here, I would bet that you are pretty motivated. You're just not sure exactly how to get out of this nervous system response you have to the overwhelm. And that's what we figure out slowly over time. When we're talking about somebody who is in this category, a lot of clutter, disorganization, feeling very overwhelmed, and you are living with this person or you are this person, I want you to think about, what can you let go of easily? I know there's all these methodologies for decluttering that go in a very specific order until you have to start with your clothing, or you have to start with your junk drawer, or you have to start with who knows what. Um, I believe you need to start with whatever is just easy for you, just easy for you. And set your expectations to be, can I let go of one thing today? Can I let go of one thing today? Can I let go of one thing tomorrow? We tend to have these massive expectations. I'm going to get through my whole entire house in a month. Usually that is not possible. I will say that even for somebody who doesn't have a lot of clutter, so my house is very lived in, often a mess. There's not a lot of clutter. We live mostly within the storage space that we have, except for maybe my teenage daughter, one of them, which is fine because that's the phase in life that she's in. If I were going to declutter my house in a month, I would still be pretty hard pressed to go through every single space in my home, which is already decluttered, and get through it in a month. I think we need to really manage our expectations about how much we can possibly do in any given time. There's a lot of distractions. We live in the age of distractions, right? So we had the industrial age, we had the whatever. We're in the age of distractions right now. And to turn off all of those distractions and stay very focused on a task that is overwhelming to us to begin with is really hard. Let's just recognize that is incredibly, incredibly difficult to do. So if you can start moving slowly in the right direction, That is really the key to success ultimately. And remember, it is never just about the stuff. It's always about the emotions, the the other things that have to do with the stuff. If it were just about the stuff, we could toss it out. It would be so simple. It is not. So, if we are tackling a few things every day, we also have to tackle the emotions that come with it, or the financial history that comes with it, or which is emotions again, or the story that it represents in our life, or whatever it is connected to. And that takes way longer than just tossing something into the trash. So recognize all of this, move at a pace that is comfortable for you. And if you're working with somebody else who you live with who has a lot of clutter, it's really important to manage your own expectations because our methodology and speed and attachments and everything are not this person's. And so just be cognizant, respectful, and loving as much as possible. I know how hard it is when you're working with somebody else. The other option, again, this is if you're helping somebody else, like if you have a spouse who has a lot of clutter, it's just to remove yourself entirely from the whole situation. Can you bring in an expert to help this person? Are they open to getting help from somebody else? Is there a therapist involved? I mean, usually we need to have a therapist working with us as we go down this path when we have this amount of clutter. Maybe take yourself out of the equation completely. Give your significant other the space that they need to process the stuff and to process the emotions. If you want to be helpful, can you support in a different way? Can you pick up some other things that need doing around the house to give this person more time to work on their clutter? Can you offer to drive things to donation centers, schedule donation pickups? Maybe be available to go for a walk with the other person when they hit a particularly emotional thing. Is there a way that you can be supportive that is not helping with the decluttering? So that is a very long answer on the topic of hoarding disorder, calling other people hoarders, living with somebody who has hoarding tendencies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's be the people in this world who change this game. Let's speak up and say it's not okay to call somebody else a hoarder. Hoarding is a complex medical diagnosis. And if somebody has hoarding level clutter, how can I support them in a way that is actually truly supportive and not pushing forth what I think the right thing to do is? And recognize how difficult that is to be the person in that role also.